These are 33 men who were buried alive under a mountain for 69 days, and every single one of them came back out. This is the story of the 2010 collapse at the San José mine in Chile. How those men lasted 17 days in total darkness before the outside world even knew they were alive, and how a rescue that roughly 1 billion people watched finally lifted them back to the surface. Where this happened matters as much as how, so that is where we begin. The mine. The San José mine sits in the Atacama desert of northern Chile, close to a city called Copiapó, and it pulls copper and gold out of ground that miners have worked since 1889. Chile ranks as the world's top copper producer, so mining runs deep in the country's identity. Not every mine carries the same risk, though. The large operations run by the state or by multinational companies tend to hold strong safety standards, while smaller mines like San José did not, and everyone in the region knew it. 42 times between 2004 and 2010, the mine's owner, the San Esteban Mining Company, drew fines for safety violations, and an explosion at the same site killed 3 men in 2007. The danger was so well understood that the company reportedly paid its workers around 20% more than other Chilean mines, essentially handing them extra money to accept the gamble. On the 5th of August, 2010, 34 men took that gamble and descended for their shift, and only one of them would climb out under his own power. The collapse. It struck at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Deep inside the mountain, a single colossal slab of rock tore loose, and the author Hector Tobar, who later interviewed every survivor for his book, called it a mega block, a piece of stone as tall as a 45-story building and weighing hundreds of thousands of tons. To capture the scale of it, Tobar reached for a comparison roughly twice the weight of the Empire State Building. That block ripped down through the layers of the mine and set off a chain reaction, and within seconds the men working below lost any connection to the surface. 34 people were inside when it came down. One of them, an ore truck driver, escaped, which left 33 trapped roughly 700 meters underground, about 2,300 feet, at the bottom of a long spiral road that wound 5 kilometers into the earth. The survivors gathered in what they called the refuge, an emergency shelter of only about 540 square feet. 33 grown men crowded into a room the size of a small apartment, with half a mile of solid rock pressing down over their heads. No way out. At first, the men hunted for an exit. Luis Urzua, the 54-year-old shift foreman, sent teams out to search, and the main road came back blocked. The ventilation shafts became the next hope. Mario Sepulveda, a natural showman who would soon become the face of this whole story, climbed one of those shafts looking for a way up, and he got about 150 feet before the ladder simply stopped. By safety code, that ladder was supposed to run the entire length of the shaft, and it didn't. In his own words, the ladder should have gone the whole way, and when he stared at the rock sealing the passage above him, he described a moment of utter despair. What little hope remained collapsed on the 7th of August, when a second cave-in sealed off the ventilation route completely. Climbing out was no longer an option. The mountain had shut its door. Up on the surface, the mine's owner was quickly shoved aside, and Chile's state-owned copper company, Codelco, took command of the rescue. Crews started boring narrow exploratory holes into the rock, hunting for the trapped men, but the mine's maps had gone out of date, and several of those early drills punched into nothing. For 17 days, that was the whole picture. 33 men waited below, while an entire country drilled blind above them, with no way of knowing whether anyone was still alive. 17 days in the dark survival down there came from discipline, not luck. Urzua understood that immediately. Pulling off his white foreman's helmet, the symbol of his authority, he told the men they were all equal now. And from that moment, this stopped being a workplace with a boss and became 33 people who would live or die as one. Their first real system was a democracy. Every major decision went to a vote, one man and one voice, with the majority ruling even when the split ran 17-16, because, as Urzua put it, 16 plus 1 was a majority. The most desperate vote concerned food. When they counted what sat in the emergency cabinet, 33 men were staring at some canned tuna, a little canned fruit and peas, around 24 liters of condensed milk, and a few dozen packages of cookies. Those supplies were built to last 2 or 3 days, and the men needed them to stretch across weeks. The result was strict rationing that pushed right to the edge of starvation. Each man received about a spoonful of tuna and a sip of milk, first every 24 hours, then every 48, and finally only every 72, which meant one mouthful of food every 3 days. Over their time underground, every one of them shed somewhere between 8 and 9 kilograms, close to 20 pounds a man. A small mercy arrived around the 4th day, when they found groundwater running inside the mine, and that meant dehydration would not finish them before the food ran out. Faith held the rest together. They prayed as a group every single day, and several of the men would later insist that God was the 34th miner in that room. Sepulveda kept them from cracking in a stranger way. Around day 10, he faked his own death, delivering slow, dramatic final words before he broke into laughter. And for men balanced on the edge of despair, that grim joke turned into a genuine turning point. None of this was a peaceful brotherhood the whole way through. And we will come back to that, because the real story runs more complicated than the legend. We are well in the refuge. Above ground, the drilling never stopped, hole after hole, and most of them found only rock. 17 days after the collapse, on the 22nd of August, a drill bit rose back to the surface with something taped to it. It was a note written in red ink, and it read in Spanish, Estamos bien en el refugio los 33. We are well in the refuge, the 33. That one sentence rewrote everything. Hope had been draining away because rescuers had drilled again and again and turned up no sign of life. And now they held proof. Not that someone had survived, but that all 33 had. When the first voice contact came through, the man they heard was the foreman, Urzua, whose first words were that they were well and hoping to be rescued. A second probe reached the men the following day, the 23rd, which finally let rescuers speak with them and feed that narrow borehole with food, water, and letters from home. By the 26th, Chilean television carried the first video of the miners, and a whole country could finally look at the faces it had been praying for. Camp Hope. By this stage, the mine had pulled in the attention of the entire planet. A tent city had sprouted at the mouth of the shaft, packed with the families of the trapped men, rescue workers, and a small army of reporters. and the people there named it Campamento Esperanza, Camp Hope. That name earned itself. On the 14th of September, one of the miners, Ariel Ticona, became a father while he was still buried underground, watching his daughter's birth over a video link that rescuers lowered into the mine. And he and his wife named the girl Esperanza, which means hope. More than 1,000 journalists were covering the story from around the world by then. Help arrived from far outside Chile, including from the United States Space Agency, NASA. That partnership sounds strange until you consider what NASA actually does best: keeping human beings alive and sane inside a small sealed space, cut off from the world for a very long time, which describes the International Space Station and describes the refuge just as well. A NASA team worked on site from roughly the 30th of August to the 5th of September, advising on medical care, nutrition, and psychology. And they recommended extra vitamin D to make up for the complete absence of sunlight. They treated the miners almost the way they would prepare an astronaut crew, right down to warning the men about the wave of fame that would be waiting when they surfaced. The race to drill. Reaching the men was never going to be one plan. It became 3 of them, labeled simply Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. The whole idea was to hedge every bet: 3 separate drilling operations with 3 different rigs and 3 different angles of attack, all racing toward the same trapped crew. Plan A opened around the 30th of August, Plan B around the 5th of September, and Plan C, running on oil drilling equipment, around the 19th, so that if one stalled, the others kept grinding forward. The miners themselves refused to sit still, working in shifts to clear away the tons of debris the drills knocked loose so the boring could continue. The clock pressed harder than anyone wanted to say out loud. 50 days underground came and went on the 24th of September, which made these men the longest surviving group ever known to be trapped below ground. And early estimates had warned that the rescue might drag on until Christmas. What actually happened arrived far sooner. On the 9th of October, the Plan B drill, powered by American technology from a Pennsylvania company called Center Rock and mounted on a SRAM rig, broke clean through into the miners' space, well ahead of those grim holiday predictions. A tunnel to the surface finally existed. The last problem was how to lift a living man through it. The capsule. The solution was a device they named the Phoenix. Chilean Navy engineers designed it, working from about 75 recommendations supplied by a NASA engineer named Clint Cragg. And the Navy's own shipbuilders assembled the thing. The concept was not brand new, tracing back to a German rescue tool from 1955 called the Dahlbusch bomb. But this version was built for exactly this nightmare. 3 of them rolled out. Phoenix 1 for testing, Phoenix 3 held in reserve, and Phoenix 2 as the one that actually did the work. Its measurements tell you how brutally tight this was. The interior ran about 54 centimeters wide, roughly 21 inches, barely more than the width of a grown man's shoulders. It stood around 6 feet 4 inches tall inside, and it weighed close to 420 kilograms. Into that narrow steel tube, the engineers crammed everything a man might need: an oxygen supply, a 2-way radio and camera to keep him talking to the surface, a reinforced roof against falling rock, a harness to hold him steady, and an escape hatch in the floor in case the capsule jammed and he had to lower himself back down. Retractable wheels kept it from scraping the walls of the borehole. One exchange captures just how fragile the whole plan felt. asked why the test capsule wasn't being sent all the way down to the men. The mining minister, Lawrence Goulburn, answered half-jokingly that they held it back because someone might jump in. And after 60-plus days trapped, the urge to climb into anything leading out was painfully real. The men were also placed on a special high-calorie liquid diet before the ride, partly to stop them from vomiting, since the capsule was expected to spin as it climbed the twisting shaft. The rescue. The rescue began late on the night of the 12th of October and pushed into the following day. First out was Florencio Avalos, one of the cameramen from below, who reached the surface just after midnight as the first of the 33 to see the sky in 69 days. Roughly every 25 minutes after that, the Phoenix 2 dropped down and hauled another man back up. Mario Sepulveda, the Joker who had held everyone together, came second, and as he stepped out, he dug into a bag and started handing out rocks from the mine to the rescuers and officials like souvenirs. He summed up the entire ordeal in a single line, saying he had buried 40 years of his life down there. One after another, they surfaced. Among them rode Dario Segovia, who had started working mines at the age of 8, and Franklin Lobos, a former professional footballer, and Ariel Tacona, the new father climbing up to meet a daughter named Hope. The lone Bolivian in the group, Carlos Mamani, made the trip, along with the youngest man at 19 and the oldest at 63. Someone had to go last, and the foreman demanded it be him. Urzua, the man who had removed his helmet on the first day and declared them all equal, refused to leave until every one of his crew stood safely above ground, which made him the 33rd and final miner up, roughly 22 and a half hours after the operation started. The rescuers earned their place in this too. Manuel Gonzalez went down first and came up last, spending more than 25 hours inside that mine, while the Phoenix 2 logged 39 round trips and traveled something like 50 kilometers up and down the shaft. When the last man cleared the hole, the team still in the chamber below unfurled a banner reading, "Misión cumplida, Chile, mission accomplished." And up top, President Sebastián Piñera capped the shaft with a metal lid. The world had its eyes locked on all of it. Around 1 billion people tracked the rescue on television, and the live stream shattered records, with the service Ustream serving 5.3 million streams and beating the previous champions, Michael Jackson's memorial and President Obama's inauguration. Piñera had ordered a live broadcast rather than a delayed one. Though officials were reportedly instructed to keep the cameras off any miner who looked to be in poor physical shape, what came after that is usually where people stop telling the story, on the triumph. But the honest version keeps going, and it turns messier. The legend of a perfect brotherhood was partly just that. A legend. Fistfights broke out early on. The group fractured into 3 separate factions at one point. A set of workers employed by a different subcontractor even kept their own separate camp for a while. And the men later agreed to a kind of pact, never to air certain details of what really unfolded in the dark. They pulled through together, but they remained 33 ordinary, flawed human beings under unimaginable pressure. The aftermath spun fast. Treated as heroes, the men were flown around the world, with around 26 of them attending a Manchester United training session in December of 2010, and roughly 31 taking a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, hosted by Israel, in February of 2011. Television paraded them as heroes, and an eccentric Chilean businessman reportedly handed each of them $10,000. Fame faded, and it faded unevenly. A few stayed in the spotlight as motivational speakers, while others slipped back into obscurity, and that gap bred resentment. Reporting a decade later found many of the 33 struggling with trauma, with illness, with unemployment, and with bitterness over money and what they saw as thin, long-term mental health care. Sepulveda put it bluntly, that once they came out, it became every man for himself. In August of 2011, 14 of the miners received lifetime monthly pensions of 250,000 Chilean pesos, around $540 a month. The question of justice cuts harder. This was a mine fined 42 times, a mine that had already killed 3 men in 2007. A mine missing a legally required safety ladder. And in August of 2013, Chilean prosecutors closed their investigation without filing a single charge. Only days afterward, the San Esteban Mining Company agreed to sell off the now closed mine, with part of the proceeds going to the miners and part reimbursing the government for a rescue that had cost around $20 million. Roughly a third of it covered by private donations and more than $5 million more in donated services from private companies. Chile did answer in broader ways, dismissing top officials from its mining regulator, shutting down about 18 mines, threatening around 300 more with closure, and drawing up 30 proposals to overhaul mine safety. The story itself got preserved. Hector Tobar published his authorized account, Deep Down Dark, in 2014 after interviewing all 33 men. And in 2015, Hollywood turned it into a film called The 33, with Antonio Banderas playing Sepulveda. Conclusion: return to where we started. 33 men buried alive under a mountain for 69 days, and every single one of them walking back out. Remembering this only as the feel-good spectacle it became on live television is easy. The capsule rising out of the earth, the families weeping, a billion people cheering, and all of that is real. It genuinely stands as one of the great rescues in history, a moment where engineering, faith, discipline, and cooperation across borders combined to beat odds nobody had ever beaten. The fuller truth is exactly why the story still lands. These men never should have been down in a mine that dangerous in the first place. They lived because of the discipline they forced on themselves in the dark, not because anyone above had bothered to keep them safe. And when it ended, the company that put them there walked away without a single charge while the men carried the weight of those 69 days for the rest of their lives. 33 went into that mountain, and 33 came out. What they endured to reach that moment and what happened to them afterward is the part worth holding on to.